Okay. Hey, let's get to it. Hey, everyone. Brad Miller here. Been a long time since I feel like I've done a video. So I just wanted to go ahead and upload a video. So I think it's actually been more than a year since I had done a video. I really want to get back to doing these videos more regularly. And I got a lot of things that I want to continue to say. And I don't think I really made a video and uploaded it throughout all of 2024, despite all the things that were going on. So some of what happened in 2024, I'll go back, I'll talk about, maybe I'll make some videos and kind of talk about that stuff. But right now I want to talk about 2025. So first things first, happy new year to all. So we're about a week and a half into the new year. It's already been a pretty crazy new year. I mean, 2025 really started off in what I would say is it started off with a bang, but I would consider that to be unsurprising. I mean, to me, that's just how. I mean, things are moving so quickly. They're so crazy. 2024 was a pretty wild year, and I think 2025 is also going to be a pretty wild ride. So, I just wanted to make another video and just start sharing some more content with all of you. And I'll tell you, I plan to continue to make these videos. I know my production quality is pretty unsophisticated. I pretty much just record myself and then upload it. Perhaps in the future I can get a little bit better or have an improved product. You know, we'll get there. We're trying to build this as we go. So with that said, 2025, let me frame the discussion by saying two things up front. I am an optimistic person. Now, people who either engage with me on social media or even people who know me in real life, like my friends, they may actually find it surprising for me to say that, though I feel like I feel like I communicate my optimism all the time, but sometimes perhaps that gets lost when I give my appraisal of what I think is going on. So I'm optimistic. I think there are many reasons to be hopeful. However, when I say that I'm optimistic, I believe that optimism still has to be grounded in a realistic appraisal of the situation. Otherwise, it's just naivete. So we got to understand the difference between optimism and naivete, just like we also have to understand the difference between realism and pessimism. So just because you refuse to be naive doesn't mean you're a pessimist, or just because you feel the need to be realistic doesn't mean you're a pessimist. Okay, so you can be optimistic and still be realistic. You know. Anyway, so I feel like it's important to kind of take that nuanced look at that, right? So I'm optimistic. I'm an optimist by nature. More specifically, I am optimistic about the situation that we find ourselves in. But I do believe that the situation is bad, and I do believe that the situation is likely to get worse before it gets better. But there are things to be hopeful about. Now, this is going to be a short video. I don't want to go into a bunch of detail. I just want to say a couple of things, and perhaps I can put out more videos later in which I can go into greater detail about some of the things I'm going to discuss tonight. So very briefly, what do I see happening in 2025? Well, one of the things that we know is about to happen is we're going to have a new administration that's going to move into the Oval Office. Okay. So Trump's going to go back into the Oval Office here in a little over a week. That is going to have significant impact on the United States. It's also going to have significant impact on the world. And everyone knows that, even just based on some of the comments that Trump has made recently. So what do I see happening? Do I think that Trump is going to be good for the United States? Well, overall, no. I mean, I think that when you look at his background, when you look at his associations, when you look at who in all likelihood controls him and has put him back in office, in my opinion, of course, no, I don't think he's going to be good for the United States. But that doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities that we can leverage. I do think there are opportunities that we can leverage. So am I glad that there is going to be a Trump administration as opposed to a Kamala administration? Well, yeah, but I never believed there was going to be a Kamala administration. I don't think that I think it was already a foregone conclusion that Trump was going to be the next president, and not because the American people were going to vote for him, but just because I mean, I think that's just how the system works. I mean, I think that he had already been selected as president. You know, I mean, I think there's long been this large campaign to build a cult of personality around Trump, and that put him in office in 2016. After that supposed election or selection, and it will put him in office again. And so that's just how I think things work. I don't think Kamala even ran a true, sincere campaign trying to run. I think she was put out there as a candidate that was so abominable that the American public, by and large, would then back Trump. I think that was by design. But regardless, people will agree with that. People will disagree with that. That's fine. You guys can tell me in the comments whether you agree or disagree and why. That said, regardless of where you stand on that, Trump's going to go back into the Oval Office. So what does that mean? So Trump and the circle of cronies around Trump, I guess, yeah, I'm not hiding my bias here, right? What do I think they're going to do? Well, I think this is where we have to understand the control grid, kind of the digital infrastructure and where we could likely be going in the next couple of months and years. And there are a couple of things that I think we really need to be wary of. One of those is digital currencies. Another is digital IDs. So all of this has to do with the way in which Americans can be surveilled, whether that's your activity online. To some degree, that could be the way in which you travel physically, but it could also be the way in which you conduct financial transactions, what you choose to purchase and how you choose to purchase those objects or services or whatever. And particularly if you're doing so through some sort of, digital means. So there's been a lot of talk with Trump about Bitcoin or just, kind of the use of digital currencies in general. And I'm not going to get into a discussion about that. I also don't even necessarily think that I'm the best person to discuss that thoroughly. All I want to say is I think we have to be extremely careful when we hear talk about any type of digital currencies being used as a strategic reserve or whatever. Now, obviously, there are huge debates going on right now about Bitcoin, even the origin of Bitcoin, or just about digital currencies in general. I'm not interested in delving into that right now. What I'm talking about specifically, and my point is therefore very narrow, is that I am very suspicious about the government doing things to encourage the use of digital currency because of the way in which privacy will be further eradicated, because the belief that these digital currencies will actually improve privacy, I just don't think that's true. And if it were true, I don't think the United States government would push it. Now, we're going to be given all these reasons as to why this would be helpful. I just think we have to be extremely skeptical about the reasons that we're being given. Does the United States government care about your privacy or other aspects of your freedom? No. And if you think that, well, the government will care now because Trump is in office, then I'm sorry, you're naive. I'm sorry, you're naive. So I repeat my point. When the government is trying to encourage a certain type of activity or for actions to occur in a certain domain or along a certain modality, you have to be skeptical as to why they're encouraging that. Okay, so that's kind of all I really want to say about digital currencies. I'm not here to advocate for or against, your own use of digital currencies. It's more, what is the government trying to get you to do? And is the government trying to encourage action that will increase or decrease your freedom? And I would say, as a default assumption, you should assume that the government is going to encourage action that will decrease your freedom. And then once you realize that, okay, so why are they telling you to do X, Y, or Z? Now they're going to give you all types of reasons as to why this is supposedly going to be a good thing. And that's just where you have to be vigilant in analyzing what it is that they're telling you and possibly why. So digital ID. So the same thing. And again, I don't want to get too wrapped around the axle with this, but the government can give you these seemingly good reasons as to why digital IDs would be a good idea. And, they can tell you, well, hey, we have no idea who's crossing the border. So this will be a way for us to identify who everyone is. Or, hey, voting has gotten so out of hand and you have all of this voter fraud that's occurring. And one of the ways we can cut down on this is through proper identification. To do that, we need digital IDs. Now, in theory, those are good reasons, and therefore they sound plausible. Do I believe in border security? Of course. And while I believe that, voting has certainly become very, very corrupt, as a civic duty, I certainly understand its importance. And yes, I think great care should be done to ensure that voting is done properly. And that includes individuals who are allowed to vote being allowed to vote once, and individuals who should not be voting being disallowed, you know? So in that regard, I get it. Again, it's a plausible reason, or these are plausible justifications. But again, we have seen before that the government and the networks of power that, control our government and many of the other governments along the world, they will create problems and then give you purported solutions to those problems. But those solutions, all they do is they implement some sort of system or some sort of mechanism which had been predetermined long before. They're just ensuring that the people consent to it. And you got to remember that with these people who operate like this, many of them engage in consent farming. Our consent to what they do is important, because a lot of these, there are these occult principles that they operate along, and they believe that when they're performing actions against you, those actions have more power when the intended target, that would be us, consents to these actions. It's important for us to understand that. What are some other things that I think could happen in 2025? Well, I mentioned kind of the digital infrastructure becoming more sophisticated. Well, another thing that I think could happen is war. And I'm skeptical about some of the maneuvering that has already been talked about, because I believe that they are setting the stage for war. When I say they, who's they? Well, the United States, the incoming administration, but also the networks of power that control United States governments, regardless of the administration, regardless of the political party the administration is affiliated with, but then also the other governments, large corporations, supranational organizations like the UN, the WHO, that kind of act as steering committees. Some of them in an overt fashion, some of them in a little bit more of a hidden fashion, but they act as steering committees to push certain agendas. And it's far more than just the United Nations. You have the Trilateral Commission. You have others that operate a little bit more in the shadows, like the Bilderberg Group. There's the World Economic Forum. There's the Davos Group. I mean, there are just plenty of these groups that just operate in the shadows. The ones I just mentioned tend to be fairly overt, except for maybe the Bilderbergs. But by now, everyone's pretty much heard of those. But there are others that are more hidden, operating in the shadows, but they ensure that governments move in the direction that these established networks of power want them to move in. So do I believe that the stage is possibly being set for a big war? Yeah, I do. Now, I'm not happy about that. I don't want that to happen, but that's one of the reasons why I'm saying this, because I believe that if we allow this to happen, then we could find ourselves drawn into another large war. And I think what we're going to see is another East-West divide that in some ways will look close to what the Cold War looked like. So what would this new East-West divide look like? Well, I think you're going to have the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, maybe even Israel, but you're going to have kind of these Western powers. That may also include, nations like France, Germany, etc. And then on the other side, you're going to have probably some collection of countries that includes China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Now, that may not be exactly how the battle lines end up being drawn. But my point is that you're going to have kind of these two blocks of nations, and I think that we are going to be given these seemingly plausible justifications as to why we have to go to war. In some ways, we've seen that before, right? So there's other talk right now about the world being moved into these mega regions. Um, I don't think that's mutually exclusive with what I'm talking about with the two blocks. You know, the East West divide that could occur between these two blocks in preparation for war. And then that war would obviously cause a lot of mass destruction. But then what emerges on the backside of that war? Are we closer to some sort of one world government or a governmental structure that is far more global in its reach? I think that's kind of what we need to be wary of and what we need to be looking at as a possibility if we don't resist that. So how do we resist? Well, first of all, refuse to give your consent. So when these ideas are talked about, when they're socialized, you reject them. There's already all this talk about, Canada and Greenland, and is the United States going to try and, annex all these other places? I don't know. Maybe there's validity to that, or maybe this is just talk. But regardless, people need to understand what's at play here. This is not just idle speech. It's important for us to realize what's potentially at play. And when we hear things like that, we need to start asking some very serious questions. And we need to stop assuming that plays are being done that are going to be in our own benefit. So history shows us, even recent history shows us, that our leaders in government are not necessarily going to act in our interests. In fact, my default assumptions are often that they are not going to act in our interests. And I again, this is not because I'm pessimistic. It's because I'm realistic, and it's because I'm looking through a lens that includes a historical analysis. So trying to make sense of what has happened in the past, even the fairly recent past. So, I mentioned Trump's circle of cronies, or anyway, if I didn't say that before, but yeah, Trump's circle of cronies. So what is the role that Elon Musk is playing right now? What is the role that, Vivek is playing right now, or JD Vance? I think we have to be wary of these individuals that are prominent members or figures within the military intel big data enterprise. We have to be very wary of those individuals. We have to be very wary of surrendering our privacy or surrendering our ability to remain outside of extensive surveillance, unnecessarily. And when I say unnecessarily, what I mean by that is we need to be cognizant that they're going to try and give us plausible sounding justifications as to why they need to increase surveillance. We saw this during the COVID op because they painted it up as a health necessity. So, we had health surveillance, but surveillance is surveillance. And circumventing the law is circumventing the law. And emergencies don't necessitate entirely discarding the Constitution or our framework of laws. But I'm wary about Elon's role. I don't trust Elon. I think he's an occult transhumanist technocrat. I don't trust him in any way. Therefore, I don't necessarily trust this idea of the Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, I find the idea almost comical, except that I think it's dangerous. So here's another thing that I think we have to be concerned about, and we have to be wary of. I can foresee a possibility where, and this is where I think Elon comes in, or this supposed Department of Government Efficiency, but I can see where they can supposedly strip off layers of corruption from the government. And in doing so, they will report that they are decreasing fraud, waste, and abuse in the government. But in reality, a lot of what they will do is they will just outsource to private entities. And that's always dangerous, because then you can mask what the government is doing. And we've seen that. Sometimes the lines get extremely blurred between what is being done by government departments and agencies and what is being done by private corporations or other private entities. And sometimes those private corporations are doing it with government funding, but sometimes they're doing it, self-funded. It's the private entities or corporations themselves that are funding that. Well, what can happen there? Well, sometimes Americans don't even necessarily know what is being funded with government dollars. Also, sometimes it becomes much more difficult to perform a FOIA request and figure out what exactly the government is doing, with this program or that program or whatever. And even if those requests are performed, the government can give a limited disclosure in saying this is what we're doing. This program includes this, and this, but they won't necessarily disclose that there are other parts of that program that are being performed ostensibly outside government because this private corporation is doing it. So what I could see happening, right? So that's been going on. The COVID op to some degree exposed what happens when you blur the lines between what is being done by government and what's being done, in the private sector. And sometimes it's hard to figure out where one ends and the other begins. But what does this have to do for government efficiency? Well, if you start saying that you're stripping out corruption, you're decreasing fraud, waste, and abuse, you are limiting governmental scope. In reality, you may just be hiding it behind a veil. And that veil is kind of that line where, the government purportedly, ends and private entities begin. And you can hide it over there, but it's still occurring. And so I could see that happening with initiatives like this Department of Government Efficiency, or outsourcing certain government functions to private entities. And when you do that, you can hide from public view, but you can also circumvent certain legal restrictions that pertain to the government, but don't necessarily pertain in the same way or to the same degree to private entities. Another thing that I could see happening is, as all of this is being done, it will be done in the name of efficiency. So you strip out outdated parts of the control grid under the guise of eliminating waste, and then you modernize the control grid. You implement much more sophisticated features in the name of efficiency. And this will be sold to the American public in the name of efficiency. And in reality, the American public will be asked to consent to the rebuilding or the updating or the modernization of the control grid. So anyway, so those are just a couple of things that I think we have to be very wary of. Let's not surrender our freedom. Let's not surrender our privacy. Let's not open ourselves up to increased surveillance. Let's be skeptical about what the government tells us is a good idea. Let's ask the difficult questions. Let's not be naive and just assume that everything that the new administration is going to do is going to be for the good of American citizens or good for the United States. And let's ensure that we are not consenting to our own further enslavement, further plunder, or further destruction. We no longer live in a world where we can feed the beast that is devouring us, or be unwitting agents of our own enslavement, plunder, or destruction. We got to stand up and we have to say no. So I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I do believe that there are reasons to be hopeful, and I do believe that there are opportunities that we can leverage. So no, I don't believe there was ever going to be a Kamala administration, but I do think that a Trump administration would be much better than a Kamala administration. Sure. Do I think that there will be good people in the Trump administration? Yes, I think there will be a lot of them. And some of them are probably people that are fairly awake, and some of them are people that are very good people that are probably a little bit naive. But regardless, there are going to be a lot of people that are very good people that are going to be in the Trump administration. And I think that those people can be communicated with. Those people can be influenced in positive ways. And hopefully many of those people will be will have their eyes and ears, kind of open and perceptive to what may be going on. So I think that's I think that's helpful. Now, I don't think that we can just assume that, everything's going to be great. I don't think that we can assume that that the new administration is going to do things that are going to increase our freedom. No, but I do believe that they're going to do things to make themselves look like they're fixing problems that the Biden administration created. But I think that's also dangerous because there are ways in which you can make it look like you're solving problems when in reality you're just creating new problems, while making it look like you're defeating the bad guys of the previous administration or whatever. I think that's a description that aptly sums up a lot of what we see with kind of this fake dialectic of the two political parties, et cetera. Um, but yeah, they're going to be good people in the administration, and they're going to be people that we can communicate with. That said, the the federal government over a long period of time has aggrandized far more power to its unto itself than it was ever supposed to have. And so that means that what we've got to do is we have got to force the states to stand up, reassert themselves vis-a-vis the federal government, and then also we've got to reinvigorate the states as we do that, and we've got to reinvigorate what's happening at the local level. So we got to get involved at the local level. We got to get involved at the state level. I've mentioned this before on other interviews, but if there's one thing that you can do right now to start 2025 off right, if you want some homework that's very easy to do, go read your state constitution. And if you want a second piece of homework, read the US Constitution, because most people who are probably watching this video have never read it. And that's I get it. I understand that, but let's remedy that. So read your state constitution and then read the Constitution for the United States. That for is important. That's a topic for a future video. But read those two documents. It's a little bit of homework, and then think to yourself, all right, what can I do to act more at the local level and reinvigorate, re-energize what happens at the local level, and what can I do to do the same thing at the level of the state that I live in? So ask yourself those questions, and let's try and make it as positive a 2025 as it can be. But we want to walk into 2025 with our eyes open. We do not want to be naive. We want to be realistic, but we can be optimistic. We can be hopeful, but we have to do that while we are engaging in the actions that we need to limit the way in which the networks of power can infringe upon our liberties. And we need to maximize the ways in which we can keep our liberties intact. And so with that, I'll close out just by saying again, Happy New Year, and let's work for a hopeful and inspiring 2025. All right, have a good one.